Welcome you all. Today in this video we are going to learn about JavaScript. You might have heard this term. Now what is this JavaScript? Let us explore it through this video. We all have heard about the language Java. Java has nothing to do with JavaScript. Both of them are two different programming languages. Java is an object-oriented programming language, whereas JavaScript is a scripting language. One more thing, JavaScript is also a client-side scripting language. Now what is meant by scripting or what is meant by client-side scripting? Let us learn these two terms. Now, you all might have heard about the term web page. What is a web page? Web page is a page which consists of textual data, pictures, audio or video content. Any web page or any page which consists of text, pictures, audios or videos as its content. Such a page online is said to be a web page. Now, a collection of web pages is known as a website. Hope these terms and these concepts are already known to you. Now we know what a website is. What is hosting? We have heard about the term server. What is meant by a server? Server is nothing but a computer system with much more powerful and high speed processors. It's also having large amount of memories in it. So it almost altogether we can say it's a powerful computer system. So such a powerful computer system is known as a server. Now when a website is hosted in a server, that means this website has been hosted in that particular computer system, then it is termed as a web server. Whenever a website is hosted onto a server machine, it is termed as a web server. That means now this is a program which is capable of satisfying all the client requests. Now, you have also heard about the term client machine. What is a client machine? A computer system which is used by a normal user is known as a client machine. A computer system with fewer resources and its own corresponding processor and memory. But to satisfy its demands and high requirements, it had to depend on other powerful machines so that it can acquire the resources stored in them. Whenever a user uses a client machine and makes a request for satisfying his own requirements or demands, the request is directly propagated to a server machine. The server will analyze the processing request, and depending on the request made by the user, the server will give you a response. This response will be redirected to the client machine so that the user can view it. From this it is clear that users can make the request to the services through the client machines to the server machine, and the server machine will in turn give the response back to the client machine in the form of web pages. You can request various textual data, pictures, audios or videos, whatever is stored on a web. So all these kinds of online contents can be requested through a client machine, and every request will be satisfied by a server machine. Now we know what a server is, what a client is. Client performs request, server gives its corresponding response. We have already learnt about web server is a program which is hosted in the server machine, and it is capable of accepting all client requests, and in return it gives appropriate responses to each of its clients. What about a web browser? Web browser is also a software, but it acts as an interface, where it is an interface in the client machine through which the user can send the request to the server. So user uses browser which is installed on the client machine. Through this browser program, users can make the request. At the same time, whenever the server or the web server responds to a particular request and that web page is redirected to the client machine, this output or redirected web page can also be viewed using the web browser. So what is the purpose of a web browser? Web browser helps the user to send the request from the client machine to the server. And in return, when the server gives you back the response of the request made in the form of a web page, that particular web page and its contents can be viewed on the machine with the help of this web browser. So web browser is a software which allows you to make a request. At the same time, it allows you to access the resources from the server and can be viewed on the client machine. So we have learned about various terms. We have learned about a client machine, a server machine, a web browser program, a web server program, and all this. Now let me tell you why I have taught you all this. From this it is clear that a user uses a client machine in which a browser is installed, and he uses the browser services to access the contents of the web page. Suppose the web page which the user is viewing contains the following details. Let this be the web page. At present, the web page consists of 3 information. That means the user is prompted with the form. The form requests or needs 3 important data from the user. User has to enter an appropriate name, an ID, and a password. Remember, ID and password are mandatory field. That means user has to enter these 2 fields. Without entering these 2 fields, if the user press or clicks on the button OK, what should happen? The system should give us a warning message that indicates that you cannot leave the space blank for ID, and at the same time you cannot leave the space blank for password. These 2 fields are compulsory and you must fill these 2 fields before clicking the OK button. How are these warning messages generated? So there must be some program written which accepts the input from these fields and checks whether the fields are empty or not. At the same time, there must be a program which also validates the input being accepted. That means whether the input entered is correct or not. Suppose the user has entered the name. After that, he has not entered the ID, but he has entered the password. Without filling the ID field, the user tries to press or clicks on the button OK. Then the background program will start working. It checks whether every field is filled. Every field has been entered correctly by the user. or whether the user had made some mistakes in it. The process of checking whether the input collected is correct or not is called validation. This sort of validation is done using scripting languages. So what is the purpose of scripting languages? Scripting languages are used in the programming statements to check whether the user has entered a correct input or not. Because database never demands that incorrect information should be entered in it. Whatever sort of details are entered to the database should be absolutely valid data. Okay, so it is very urgent to check whatever is being entered by the user is correct or not. What happens if the user tries to enter numeric values through the name field? It is not a valid name because name should contain only characters in it. You cannot enter numeric values in the name field. Okay, so in this way, if the user tries to enter knowingly or unknowingly, if he tries to enter invalid data into the fields, there must be some program that is capable of checking whether the data entered is correct or not. If it is not correct, then the program must give us a warning message that you have to make the following corrections in it. If everything entered is in its correct way, then only the entire details will be stored in the database. So for such validation purposes, we require scripting languages. And here is where we require the languages like JavaScript. Okay, so now you know what a scripting language is. What is the purpose of a scripting language? Why do we need this scripting language? But I said one more thing. JavaScript is a scripting language. At the same time, it is a client-side scripting language. There are two types of scripting languages. Scripting language can either be a client-side scripting or it can be a server-side scripting. Now, I say that client-side scripting is far better than a server-side scripting. Let me explain why. For this, let me move on to the next example. Suppose I am having a form. I am trying to register for something. The user had made a request, and in return to the request, the server has given you this form. Now the user is trying to fill this form. Altogether, there are 5 fields. User have to enter his name, age, phone number, address and PIN code. Let us closely examine each of these fields. Now we all know that the first field is name. In the name field, every character should be an alphabet. That means in the first field, a user should not enter a numeric value. If the user tries to enter any numeric value in it or any special character in it other than space, then our scripting language must display an error message indicating that your name is incorrectly entered. Field number 2, age. Age, we know that to the maximum a person can have an age of either 2-digit or 3-digit. No more than that. So if a person tries to enter an incorrect value, any value which is greater than 3-digit or some negative values, if he tries to enter an invalid age, then also an error message should be generated indicating that you have entered an invalid age. Enter the correct age. At the same time, age demands that whatever value has been entered into this field should be numeric in nature. You cannot enter special characters or alphabets in this field. Now comes the field number 3, phone number. This field also demands that whatever you are entering in this field should be numeric in nature. No special characters and no alphabets are allowed in this field. At the same time, phone number demands that if it is a mobile number, it should exactly be 10 in its length. Every mobile number has 10 digits in it. So you cannot enter more than 10 digits in it, or you should not enter less than 10 digits in it. You have to exactly enter 10 digits in it. So if the user tries to enter a mobile number which is less than 10 or greater than 10, or if it is not a numeric in nature, in any of these three cases, system should appropriately give a warning message to the user. Now comes the fourth field. It's an address field. You can enter whatever you can, any special characters, any numeric value, or any alphabets can be entered in this field. There is no restriction in entering the values in address field. Now comes the last field, which is a PIN code. Now we know that PIN code demands that it should be numeric in nature. So if a user is not entering a value which is numeric in nature, error message should be prompted before him. And it is also demanded that the PIN code should be exactly 6 digits in its length. It should not be less than 6 or greater than 6. In either of these two cases, it's an invalid PIN code, and at that time warning message should be generated. So while entering data through a form, different types of checking must be done. All these checkings are done through scripting languages. As I have already told you, there are two types of scripting languages. One is server-side scripting and one is client-side scripting. If the scripting language or the scripting code is written on a server machine, I repeat, if the scripting code is written on a server machine, it becomes a server-side scripting. At the same time, if the scripting code is written on the client machine itself, that means it is executed in the browser itself, then it is called a client-side scripting. What is the difference between these two types of scripting? Suppose I have entered all these data, name, age, phone, address, PIN code, everything. And suppose I am having some errors in it. I have entered invalid data in these form fields. Without checking it, I have clicked on the OK button. Suppose that I have not written any client-side scripting. Entire scripting or checking is written on the server machine. That means scripting code will be executed in the server machine. So once you click on the OK button, the entire details will be transferred to the server machine without checking. That means the whole data, which includes both valid and invalid data, that means correct and incorrect information, everything will be transferred from the client machine to the server machine without being checked at least once. After reaching the server machine, the server will execute the server-side scripting. And while executing the server-side scripting, it identifies that some of these data are incorrectly entered. And since the data are incorrectly entered, they cannot be entered into the database. So server in return gives you the message that the data contains some invalidation in it. As a result, the entire form will be reset. Got it? What did I say? As a result, the entire form will get reset. Server asks the user to fill the form once again from the beginning. So in this way, a lot of time is wasted. The user has to enter the entire data once again from the beginning, which is a tedious task. But at the same time, if the scripting code had been worked in the client machine itself before being transferring it to the server machine, if the whole thing was checked at the client side itself, we could have saved our time. That means after entering each field, when we try to proceed to the next field, after entering first field, if I am trying to proceed to the next field, if there is any mistake in the first field entry, immediately the client scripting will work out and it will highlight the error. That means only after correcting each field I can proceed to the next field. So that before clicking on the OK button, all the field checking will be completed, and it ensures that every field contains only valid data. Now when you press or click on the OK button, only the valid information will be passed on to the server machine, and as a result server will store it directly onto the database. So it saves a lot of time. Clear? So this is the advantage of writing scripting code or executing scripting code in the client machine itself. It is always better to execute the scripting code in the client machine. So JavaScript is one such scripting language. It's a scripting language which is executed in the client machine. It intimates you whenever you go wrong. Whenever you try to enter an incorrect data, it points out, clearly picks and corrects you before you proceed. So in this way, JavaScript is capable of generating dynamic web pages. Now what is meant by this dynamic web pages? Now you know what a JavaScript is. It's a scripting language. At the same time, it is capable of performing client-side scripting, and it is capable of generating dynamic web pages. So there are two types of web pages. One is static web page and one is dynamic web page. If the content of web page is not going to change irrespective of who is going to see it. Whoever requests the web page, if the content of web page is same for all the persons at all the time. Whenever you request the page, whoever requests the page, if the content of web page is same, it is a static web page. But if depending on the user request, depending on the time, depending on the place, if the content of the web page is changing, then it is called a dynamic web page. So surely JavaScript is a powerful scripting language. It's a programming language which can be used to create dynamic web page. It has a huge scope in the coming era. So hope the concepts being explained over here regarding the introduction of JavaScript, what a JavaScript is, what is its purpose, where it can be used and how it can be used are all clear to you. Keep watching the videos, support me, subscribe the channel if you are not yet subscribed. Thank you.